February 26, 1975, and I'm interviewing Rabbi Klausner in Yonkers, New York. And I first wanted to start off with a couple of questions before we get to some of the documents.
Yes.
Rabbi Max Wall, reported the following incident about you, and I wanted to verify it, and perhaps you could give more details about it if possible. The story centers around a one-star general who was made a civil affairs officer for all of Bavaria. You had wanted this man, who was a Bronx politician, to sign a document authorizing all of the mayors around the area of Munich to undertake partial financing of the Sherit HaPleita volumes. And the general responded with something to the effect that you're kidding, and whereupon you asked if you could speak to him off the record. And he said, "Sure, Chaplain, he's the..." Then you told him that you were from New York City, and you are in the reserves, and you do not plan to remain in the army. How would it look if it got around in the New York papers that you had refused a rabbi the help that would make it possible for him to bring back the scattered remnants of what was once a proud, cultured, and beautiful people? Even if it weren't true, what would it look like? He signed the document after using a couple of choice words. This is what Rabbi Wall remembered of you telling him about a particular incident. Do you remember that?
No, I have no recollection of it.
Does it sound plausible?
No.
That's not your style.
I don't know. I just can't. I can't recall it. I have a fairly good picture of all the problems in connection with the Sherit HaPleita volumes. Each volume presented another problem because they were illegally printed, and therefore I had to find another way of printing each volume in terms of press, paper, and so forth. I would be hard put to try to restructure each volume. I just don't recall that particular situation.
Now, is it correct that Rabbi Wall was the only official chaplain in your area during the first few months after the war, and that is the reason why the packages were sent to him?
To my knowledge, he was the only chaplain. He was the only one that was there for any extended time. He was with the 9th Division, as I recall.
And is it correct that you used Rabbi Wall to help you with official military activities or concerns?
Wherever I could. Of course, the package program was one that had to be worked through him.
Okay. All right, now let's get down to some of the basic documents that we were talking about. The basic question was with Dr. Grinberg, and how he was invited to go to the United States, and then there was an effort to make it difficult for him to do so. What was behind all of this?
Well, as far as I was concerned, what was behind it was simply this. It was felt here in the United States that the time had already come to have a representative of the people there in the United States. Heretofore, or up to this moment, all representations were made either by delegations coming to Germany and returning to the United States, or people coming from Germany in an official capacity with army or some agency, but the people really were not represented by any one of them. And so an invitation came for Dr. Grinberg, who was then the presiding officer of the Central Committee of Liberated Jews, and we were very excited about it because this meant that for the first time one of the people would come to the United States and express the concerns of the people. Furthermore, Grinberg was the best possible choice. First of all, he was the popular president of the Central Committee, and a very attractive personality, capable of representing the cause very well. And since there was no way of getting him there except through some official agency, the American Joint would be the agency to to get him to the United States, and it was more or less agreed that that would be the decision and the procedure. Then suddenly, to my surprise, I had learned that instead of Grinberg, the JDC had chosen a delegation from the Bergen-Belsen camp. And this was both shocking and disappointing to us, and that left us out in the cold, so to speak. Now the question is, why did they do this? Well, for me the answer was obvious. The JDC had a good relationship with the Bergen-Belsen crowd, with Rosensaft. They didn't have a good relationship with Munich. Rosensaft was an authority at Bergen-Belsen. He directed the whole program, and he maintained a cordial relationship. It was a kind of a sweetheart compact there. As far as Munich was concerned, this was a much, much larger program, after all. It took in all of Germany. And there were many problems and contentions with Joint, and Joint could not establish the kind of relationship in Munich that it established with one camp in Bergen-Belsen. And so the leadership felt that they were not going to bow to the Munich structure, and so in order to satisfy the request from America, they decided that they were going to send Bergen-Belsen people, and then of course they lied to us. We knew at the time. It was a ridiculous statement telling us that there was no room for another person. Our argument was, if there was no room, take one of the Bergen-Belsen people out, because they were really not representative personalities. And so I decided that I would send Zalman Grinberg. I'd got an invitation from the American Jewish Conference, and I was going to get him. And I effected that. I managed to, through a whole series of strange circumstances, which are fantastic, actually.
Should we go into it, or did we deal with it? We only dealt with it slightly.
Well, actually, it's a kind of a one of the typical confusion story. One step was more confused than the other, and each step referred back to the original step, which was the basic confusion, and as a result, Grinberg was able to leave Europe, and pardon me. When Grinberg arrived in the United States, he was stopped actually at the airport and was not allowed to enter, because it was discovered by the time he got here that there was something irregular. However, there was an intercession on the part of the Jewish community, and he was permitted to come into the United States.
Who in particular intervened?
American Jewish Conference people. And just who they got to effect his release and permission to stay in the United States, I don't know. But
he was held at the airport?
That's right. He was held by the Federal Bureau of Investigation because the papers were not in order, which of course they weren't. The papers were a rather strange series of documents that I had prepared, and but once he got here, not only did he address the conference, he was invited throughout the country, and a number of items were written about him. In fact, there was a beautiful article written by a man named Siegel in Cincinnati, I remember, called "The Little Man from Dachau," and he did a wonderful job in representing the cause of the people. As for the items that played a part in getting him to the United States, the initial move that made it possible was a sudden change in the procedures of the United States Army. When I prepared a statement, which is a kind of a formal order, as the Army would prepare the order for movement of an individual, and went down to the airport, Munich, and talked to the officials, they were not, they didn't feel that this was something they could handle, and then suddenly one of the men said, and furthermore, our procedures have changed now. You just can't send anyone. You have to buy a ticket, a military ticket, that is for a civilian. Well, I said, fine, I'll buy the ticket. I think he was anxious to sell his first ticket. And starting with that ticket that we bought, we then wrote an order based upon the ticket. In other words, recognizing that the first order had no significance. So we now wrote an order following a procedure saying DP number so-and-so. We created a number for him with an identity card. He had no identity card. No one had identities of any sort. And then said, based upon military passage certification number so-and-so, just to confuse it with numbers. But basically what we did after the first step was to structure the whole order based upon that so-called ticket, which was a military ticket. And no one understood the ticket because it was one of the first that was issued. And so there was enough confusion there to make possible the first move. And so we got him to Paris. In Paris he had trouble, because there again they stopped him and didn't know just what to do with this civilian. After all, civilians weren't traveling on military planes, especially a DP. And so they made inquiry back to Germany. Germany made inquiry back to Munich. And Munich only confirmed what we had already stated. And so Paris now got a confirmation saying, yes, we confirm the following based upon this has happened here. So for the point at Paris felt that this was a valid move. And so he was able to leave Paris and go on to the United States. Sometime thereafter, I was investigated, and then the proceedings began.
Because of this incident?
Oh, yes. The number of officers came to see me, and we went through a long process, a rather interesting process of investigation. They showed me the documents. Did I prepare this? Yes, I prepared this document, and I went through each step and showed them exactly what I did. And then the interesting question was, where is the man? So I said, well, he's here. And they were a little bit surprised. They were under the impression, first of all, that I took someone and helped him out of Europe, and as they indicated to me, this was a source of embarrassment for the United States Army. It indicated that their security was lax here, that I was able to take an individual. I could take this individual. I could take anybody. I could take a Nazi, let's say, and get him out of Germany.
Except for the fact that he was stopped in the United States.
Yes, but they weren't interested in that. It seems that the Army was now being put on the map. And so I said he was here. Well, they want to meet him. So I got Dr. Grinberg down. And then the next question was, how could I prove that the man I sent and the man that they're talking to is the same man? You see, that maybe I'm again trying to, well, this became again a kind of a thing. Well, this officer kind of lived with me for some time, day in and day out, moving with me and constantly explaining to me very, very, very graciously exactly what his problem was: the embarrassment of the Air Corps and the pressure on Army, and the need to prove now that the man that went and the man that returned is the same man. I tried to indicate to him that if you would check back in the United States and see exactly who this man was in terms of national organizations. And then after a number of days of just spending considerable time with me, he came to me and asked me if I would do him a favor. And I said, well, what is it? He says, I need a necktie. I says, what's the necktie for? He says, well, since I'm here and there's a dance someplace at one of the officers' clubs, I'd like to go. And so I scrounged around and got him a tie, and that is a GI tie, and then as I handed it to him and he put it on, he said, well, I think this is it, and we left it at that. He disappeared, and I went about my work.
So that was the end of the investigation?
That was the end of the investigation.
Do you have any reason to believe that it was because you were a chaplain that they stopped it, or simply because the officer was convinced that you weren't...
Well, I think after living with me for all those days and observing who I was and what I was doing, actually, he suddenly sensed that this wasn't a kind of an evil act on the part of someone to accomplish something for some personal or devious reasons, and I think he sensed the situation and just put an end to it.
When was that? It was 1946, obviously.
Whatever the date was in
Yeah.
terms of his coming and going. This had to be
So it's-
after he had returned
So
from
it's
the
shortly after he returned
after he had returned to the United States.
from the United States.
That's
okay.
right.
Now, in the documents that I sent you, there was a letter from Marcus, from Chaplain Marcus.
I didn't see that. What about it?
There was a letter which described, to Grinberg about the running of the committee. I mean, why was he involved in that?
Marcus was not involved with the Central Committee in any way. The only possibility here is that Marcus, who moved about for a short period, and I think that he maintained or claimed a relationship with the American Jewish Congress.
Yeah, yes, he was. Well, he came back and later worked with them.
With the Congress, and
Yeah.
his interest in the Congress, and I think he spoke in the name of the Congress either unofficially or later officially. He had nothing to do with our organization or structure. In fact, I may have met him once or so, but there was no contact of any kind or any working together or any program.
That's why this letter intrigued me.
Yes, well, it's interesting to me too. The only thing that I can judge from it is he befriended Grinberg, and sensing what the situation was or what he thought it was, just made certain suggestions to Grinberg in terms of a personal relationship. Actually, the reference is not out of line in the sense that Grinberg was not a controlling force in the Central Committee. He had no control of the Central Committee.
Mm-hmm.
But this raises another question. There was no control to be had, you see.
Well, people maintained that you controlled it.
That's right. And the reason that I controlled it is because I was able to control aspects of the program which these people could not control. I mean, there's no question that about that. But within the so-called structure of the Central Committee, Grinberg remained in St. Etienne. Mm-hmm. He was the head doctor. He ran the institution, and he was a very permissive sort of fella. He was a nice fella. He was a good representative. He expressed the concerns of the people. But the actual work of the committee was run by a resident group, the people in the committee. He would come and visit. But when you take other people that were in the work, like if you take Levi Shalit, who ran the newspaper, or Putchis, who ran the office, or one of the others that actually did the work, these were the working people, and they controlled whatever could be controlled within the committee, and that was very little because it was an illegal structure. There was, in 1945, certainly, no member of the committee was able to meet with any of the military representatives. At best, they could meet with a DP, that is a G5 section officer in charge of DP work, and they were constantly mistreated by them. In other words, they were patronized and so forth, but they weren't in a position to affect any type of a program. And so from Marcus's point of view, he may have seen this or felt this, but then he didn't understand what the situation was because he wasn't resident, he didn't live in the area, and he could have come and gone. But I have no awareness of this letter, actually.
Well, that's why I found it very interesting, because I know that he was not involved in any way with it, and then to make this type of statement. Now, I went through some of the notes of meetings that took place with the Central Committee very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that while you were present at most of these meetings, you did not it was never recorded what you said.
Yes.
Was there any particular reason for that?
Yes, because as a rule, I did not dominate a committee meeting. In other words, even contrary to a statement that Schwartz makes in his report on me, I recognized that the committee meetings were an exercise in desire and wish, and also that the committee was politically structured in terms of groupings. and always thought it best to leave the discussions to the committee itself. And then after the committee meetings were over, then I would sit with the leaders and we would decide on what action to take. Most of the work that was being done was not funneled through the committee.
And that's why you appear at the meetings, but you don't appear
That's
to
right.
be...
Now, they're
Because if someone were to look at that, they would
Yeah.
feel that you were just there in name only.
Well, there were, when you take the issues that are discussed, they were not issues that were of any concern to me because they could not be carried out. But every once in a while there was a major issue. For example, when a decision came down that the children would be moved to England, and the time and place was set for their movement, whatever children we had, there was no question about it at the time. I proceeded, together with those who were going to handle the movement, I believe they were either UNRWA or Red Cross personnel, to arrange for the collecting of the children. And with representatives of the committee, we went out to the airport to see to it that the children would be properly cared for. And after the first visit to the airport, when the planes did not arrive and the children were returned to their centers, the committee then made a decision that the children will not go. Now, I was not part of that decision. They made the decision. And in the process of making the decision, I felt with them, and then took the position that the committee took, and became the representative of that decision to the authorities. In other words, then I went before the authorities and said, the children will not go to England. So there are cases where now the committee was concerned, let's say, with distribution of materials, whatever materials we had. Even the package materials that came in and were separated eventually went into the hands of the committee, and the committee fought over these things. They were always suspicious in terms of who's handling it and who's getting it and how it's being distributed. Now, my interest was not in this area. My interest was, first of all, to get the packages into Germany, to set up the process by which they would be broken down. But once it came to distribution, I was no longer interested, and this now became a matter of the committee. Other matters that were handled by the committee were payments to staff payments and so forth. And since money was not a means of payment, they had to be paid in terms of materials. And the materials came out of the package program. Here again, I did not take an interest of how they handled it or just what process they were going to use. And then the committee would meet from time to time in terms of political situations, such as delegations arriving in Germany, and their meeting with delegations and the position they were to take with delegations. And here again, this was a matter which they debated, and I did not take a position here. Furthermore, I was convinced right in the beginning that eventually this has to become a people's program. It wasn't for me to come to meetings and start to dominate the meetings. But the actual programs that went on from day to day and the work were completely independent of the meetings of the Central Committee.
But you had an overall hand in what was going on.
It controlled it completely.
Yeah.
Not because I wanted to control it. Now let's begin with the building itself, 3 Siebertstrasse, where we were housed. Well, I got the building. The Army wouldn't give the building to the DPs. And so I got Colonel Sylvie, who was then the property control officer of Munich, to give me the building. And so it was, in a sense, my building. And then, of course, we start to establish the offices there. I lived in it because I had no other place to live. I lived on the 3rd floor of the building. And then later, when Joint wanted an office, we started to give Joint space in that building. And they came in. Eventually, of course, they took over the building, but this is how they came into it. When some of the shlichim came, especially the illegal shlichim, of which there were a number, and they needed a place to live and food, I put them up also in the building. We set up our tracing bureau in the building. So the building to begin with was there by virtue of my placing it there. You know the story of the hospitals, Bogenhausen. The committee couldn't go out and get a hospital, and so we effected the Bogenhausen Hospital, and then you had to supply it. Committee couldn't supply it, so we had to either get stocks in Germany, or we had to get them from the United States and make the hospital workable.
Now, Dr. Linux said that he helped provide.
That's right. At the beginning, he gave us. It was through him, without Linux, of course, without any authority in any of our programs, we couldn't have gotten where we finally arrived. There had to be somebody somewhere that was able or wanted to or was compelled to work in our direction. Linux at first rejected the whole idea. I don't know just what picture he gave you, but the first approach to Linux was one of rejection. He didn't feel that there should be a Jewish hospital to begin with.
He still rejects the notion to this day.
Oh, he does. Well, then we are correct in the observation. He rejected the idea. We had to go to him a first time, a second time. We had to keep working on him, and finally we were able to.
How long would you say this process took?
With the hospital?
With the hospital.
Well, first it began independent of Linux.
Okay.
It began when we realized that there was a growing population in Munich, and we needed a hospital. And then there was a doctor by the name of Pesachovich, who's a very successful doctor in New York now, Pesachovich. And he was a member of the committee because he came from that crowd, that Freiman crowd. And we then made him the chairman of the health committee of the Central Committee. There wasn't much for him to do as chairman of the health committee. After all, the United States Army was handling sanitation and so forth, and what had happened was that we started little hospitals in the various camps. Feldafink had a hospital, and Dr. Haitan, an interesting personality. He was here in the United States. I had a note for him, but he's back in Paris. I mean, in France. I have some correspondence with him from time to time. Haitan and his wife, a very interesting couple, were in charge of the hospital in Feldafink, but we had no hospital in Munich. And so Pesachovich began to push for a hospital in Munich. And
how do you spell his name so we can get it on the record properly?
I would say Pesachovich would be Pesachowitz. I mean, he's here in New York if you want to talk to him. A very nice chap. Very successful now as a doctor. And so I thought we might work with the 98th General Hospital, which was a military hospital, and get a section of the hospital, and I tried for that. I wasn't successful there. I didn't push too hard, but that was one of the avenues that I was going to travel. And then it was brought to my attention that there was this hospital in Bogenhausen, which originally was not a hospital. It was some other kind of a building, which was turned into a hospital, and it was run by some order, Catholic order, sisters. And I stopped in to see the hospital, and I realized that the hospital was not up to full capacity. And I felt that any institution that had come into existence as a war measure rather than an old institution, we had certain claims to. And so we decided that we would try to use the hospital. We weren't going to take over the hospital, we were going to use it. And by that we meant that we would be able to bring our patients into the hospital, and more important, our doctors. And that's how the Bogenhausen program began. And we proceeded, in other words, without Linux. We had already moved into the hospital by taking space in it, insisting that we had rights there.
You just drove up with your ambulance?
First, I walked in. By that time, we didn't have to drive up there because we were further away. This we did with the other hospitals in the early days. But I was no longer in Dachau at this point, and I didn't have the facilities of ambulances and so forth. Here it was simply a matter of walking in and discovering that this is an institution that came into existence by virtue of a military decision, that is a German military decision, and therefore we could contend with it. And the people were not adverse to our bringing patients in, and so we began to bring patients in. And
you didn't have to use. Excuse me. You didn't have to use any.
Not at this point. No. They realized that if we brought any force, that it would be a difficult situation for them, and so they were willing to cooperate with us. And so we brought patients in, and we brought Dr. Pesachovich in. So actually, even before we went to Linux, then from then on, we decided that Pesachovich wanted the hospital for himself, and he wanted to be the head of the hospital, and we felt again that this would be a good thing for us. And so then we began to inquire and find out just what the structure is, and found Linux. That's how we got to Linux. We weren't aware of every detail of the military structure, of who controlled what. It was the fact that we were already in the hospital. We were beginning to move towards well, anyway, by the time we got to Linux, we were in the hospital, and at that point what we wanted was the control of the hospital. And that meant that we would take over and move out the other patients as they got well, and we would have a place where the DPs, or the Jews of Munich, could find some help. In fact, I remember one incident there where, in the early days, we had a patient there, and those were the days of when penicillin was just coming into vogue, and family came to see me and told me that they had, I don't remember what it was, a sister, I believe, and she was seriously ill, and they were told they needed penicillin. Well, it was very interesting. The Army had, at that point, issued an instruction that no penicillin would be made available to the civilian population, including, of course, the DPs. There was always a problem with who was a DP, whether he was civilian or not. This was one of the major problems. And I went to see Pesachovich about the penicillin, and he kind of shrugged his shoulder whether it really was necessary or wasn't necessary, but the fact is we didn't have it. And the pressure on me was tremendous to get penicillin. And so I then started to look for penicillin. First, I tried to get the Army to change its regulation on it, because it made no sense as far as I was concerned. But that would take time, so in the meantime, I discovered that the dentists were using penicillin in the clinics, in the military dental clinics. I don't know what they were using it for, and they were using it I think in a powder form, and for some purpose in treating the teeth. Just what they were doing with it, I don't know. And each one had a small supply, and so what I would do is move about and kind of pick up whatever I could get my hands on in terms of the penicillin for this particular case. So that was the beginning, actually, of our work at Bogenhausen, and then eventually Linux finally made it official, turned over the hospital to us.
Do you want to go into specifics about how that part of the...
Well, he had the authority in terms of assignment, and he had the authority over supplies in Munich. Of course, the supplies that we got were German supplies, and as far as American military supplies, I could get them easier than he could in terms of different units, which we got. All I had to do was to go to one of the military collecting companies where the supplies were obtainable, because they were constantly on the move, and they were always interested in unloading things. And so I could get supplies.
Because you were a chaplain?
Well, I was a chaplain, and people knew that I was involved, and either someone was sympathetic to the cause of the DPs, or he was against the whole DP situation.
Well, what I'm trying to find out, basically, is that had you been a regular GI, would you have been able to do
Absolutely not. No, no, no. Being first of all a chaplain, an officer, and someone who was known is completely involved in the picture. It wasn't a case where you broke in on a military unit and said, "Here I am." I remember one military unit down near Starnberg. I came there one day with a beautiful girl. And they got terribly excited about her. And I says, "Fine, you know, here, it's between you and the girl." And we had lunch, and we got to know each other. And finally, before I went, I said to them, "Listen, before I go, I need contraceptives, rubbers." And they looked at me, "Rubbers? We got a warehouse of rubbers, you know." And I remember, and so we got a truck and we loaded up with the rubbers. After all, people are living now, and you've got to have these amenities. No one's going to supply them. JDC didn't think of purchasing rubbers and sending them to the DPs, and the United States Army was not going to give them the supplies, and so I got them. I remember delivering a case of them to St. Etienne Hospital, and the fellow in charge there was a very nice chap by the name of Rapeka, in charge of supplies, and he was either a yeshiva student or a rabbi. And when I brought this among other supplies, he says, "What's that?" So I opened the case and I showed it to him. And he was terribly upset about it. On the one hand, he didn't want to take them, and on the other hand, he recognized that this is a needed supply, so he was caught in this little thing. But the supplies did not present a problem, medical supplies in that sense. But getting the hospital and having it established and putting it under our charge, this was important. And without Linnick, of course, it couldn't have been done. And if Linnick wanted to make an issue of it, he certainly could have. He could have thrown us out, or he could have done something. And then, in turn, we paid him for it. And
what did you pay him with?
Well, he was interested in collecting art pieces at the time. And he has a collection that he has with him that he's brought over, and he needed money to pay for.
This is the part of the story you didn't tell me.
Yes, and we gave him the money to buy his art pieces. And he would give us the figures, and I think we gave him some stones also, diamonds that we had been able to pick up. We'd made a deal, and then I was a little bit upset about the deal, because I felt that he should have done it outright. First of all, it was not his to give away and so forth. And so to make up for it, he was living in a house, a flat, second story in one of the sections of Munich. And it was very well furnished, very nice place. And from time to time, I'd go up there and visit with him. And one day he told me he was leaving. And I looked around and I said, "Well, this is a good-looking flat and it's nicely furnished." He says, "Well, I'll tell you what. Of course, it doesn't belong to me. I'll tell you exactly when I'm leaving. And within the hour of my departure, and before the people come to claim their apartment and so forth, you can do whatever you want. It won't be my responsibility. I'm out. And they will not have had time to get around to it." And so we had a big truck located right near the apartment. At the appointed hour, he left, and we then took all the major pieces and delivered them to a building that we had acquired in Munich for a Munich center now, a big building. One of the things was, for example, a piano, other things like that that we could use to start furnishing the center for the people. And so this was more or less a little bit of the compensation that we got. Also, we took the furniture out and furnished the offices of the shlichim. They had gotten a building on Mailstrasse that had no furniture. And so we had taken the furniture and given them furniture for their offices. So this was a little bit of satisfaction that we paid for a hospital, and we got the hospital, and we also got
He also got an ambulance, is that right?
we got an ambulance.
No,
yes.
he got.
Yes, I
Dr.
mean this
Lennox
is
also got-
yes, but this was no problem. You could have gotten all the ambulances you wanted. We had no problem in getting vehicles because you must understand that at the end of the war, you had all this material. The Army had no use for it, and they set up these big lots where they collected a tremendous amount of material in terms of vehicles. And all you had to do was go down to any lot and talk to the sergeant in charge. Either he would give it to you, or you'd make a deal with him, and he would even cannibalize a number of them to give you one good one. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we even tried to. Later on, the Army set up a purchase system where you could purchase this. Other governments could come in and purchase the vehicles. There was no problem on vehicles. This was one area in which we always seemed to be able to get along. So whether he gave us the ambulance or we could have always gotten.
No,
yes.
the way Ann Borden told me was that she had gone down there one night and given him an ambulance, and this was one of the ways in which you paid him off.
Well, again, even that, all this stuff wasn't his. In other words, his to
Right,
sell and so
right.
forth. Anyway, this was his role in the story. We've been friends ever since, and I see him from time to time.
Now, since we're talking about this hospital, maybe we ought to get to that document about Leo Schwartz. And he talks about it.
Yes.
This is from file 161 from YIVO, passing 17 July 1946. Confidential to Mr. J.H. Whiting, Zone Director of UNRWA, subject activities of Chaplain Klausner. Okay.
The UNRWA was embarrassed on many occasions by our work. First of all, the UNRWA felt that it was in charge of DP work, and they were quite aware that there was a tremendous effort being made, independent of UNRWA, and that UNRWA was constantly coming up against decisions that were made by our organization, with which they could not contend because UNRWA was under the direction of Army. And so from time to time, we had certain encounters. And two of them that I recall had to do with, one, the issuance of passes or orders for people to move about, and secondly, the acquisition of the Bogenhausen Hospital.
Yeah.
Since UNRWA had a health department, and it thought it was in charge of these activities, and then suddenly discovered that a hospital had been established, it turned to the JDC. And since JDC was under the direction of UNRWA, it held JDC responsible. And so Schwartz, in his statement, tries to explain the hospital situation. I find it very interesting, and it reflects upon the personality of Schwartz.
You had never seen this before?
No, but I read it the other day.
Mm-hmm.
I find
I'm saying
yes.
Before this, you'd never seen
Yeah,
it?
I find it very interesting that instead of his taking the position at that time that here was a good thing that was accomplished, and instead trying to apologize for it, which indicates that he really wasn't aware of what was going on in Germany. In other words, UNRWA certainly wasn't going to provide the medical help, and if he knew or should have known that all our hospital structures were there because we created them. UNRWA didn't have the ability. After all, St. Etienne and Gauting and now Bogenhausen. So he wrote this particular piece about Bogenhausen, a fait accompli. And I counted the severe reaction of the UNRWA Health Division. Now, the UNRWA Health Division wasn't capable of setting up hospitals for us, never did. In fact, if you take the whole history of our hospital system, the hospital in Feldafing was not set up by UNRWA. It was set up by the Haitans.
The Haitans work with JDC?
They were a strange apparition. If I remember correctly, there were what they called MMLA teams. I think it was MMLA. These were people that came into Germany before Joint, you see, and worked with the DPs.
From where?
They came from France. They were French people, and they still live in France. Just how these people got there, how they were recruited, what the structure was, is something that I'm not familiar with. It would be interesting for me now to go back and find out. And later on, they seem to have established a relationship with the Joint, but they never wore the same uniforms, and didn't seem to be under the complete direction of Joint. And there were very few of them. And the hospital in Feldafing, the camp hospital, was a good little hospital. It was under the Haitans. He was a doctor. Of course, St. Etienne and Gauting, these had nothing to do with UNRWA or Joint, now Bogenhausen. So basically, UNRWA was not in a position to do any good for us in this. And the fact that Schwartz didn't realize this or recognize this is an amazing situation. The things he says about Lipa are correct, I'm pretty sure that I did threaten and made sure that Schwartz stayed out of our way and let us do what we thought was
What were you afraid
best.
of his doing? What was he going to do?
Just stirring up controversy or trouble.
You think it was a conflict of personalities here, or something beyond that?
Well, I would think that, let's say from his point of view, there may have been conflict of personality. He didn't bother me. In fact, I thought he was a nice guy. He was a literary figure, and I knew his name before he came. I was a little bit surprised that Joint selected that kind of a man. I think they later recognized that he wasn't the man for the job. He was basically a nice guy in terms of his personal relationships with people. But he was not a factor. He wasn't sensitive to the forces. He wasn't capable of moving in a way to affect any programs for the people that would be to their advantage.
So you think that this may have been one of the reasons why he reacted in this way?
I know. He's reacting here as a man would in an organizational structure. In other words, here he is. He came in. He is supposed to be the JDC man. I think also that JDC didn't explain the situation to the men when they came in properly, in the sense of saying, listen, you're going to Munich, there's a factor there that you have to contend with. These people came in as patrons. You know, they were going to help the people. They were going to direct their lives.
Well, they probably thought that they were going to take over.
Take over, that's right. And they had something to take over, but what they took over was not an effective structure. Just as the committee itself, in its meetings, didn't have much to do, not because it didn't want to do it, because it was difficult in terms of affecting the program. JDC, too, was limited by virtue of the fact that it had to account to UNRWA for whatever it was doing. They even had to get permission to move into my building. This was a big battle.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, sure. They had to stay in Passing. And Passing was off the beaten track. It was away from Munich. They had to live in their quarters. And they had to be under the instruction of Whiting, or whoever was in charge. And what they fought for was a separate entity of having their office, and they finally won that. And when they did, they moved into to the building in Sieverstrasse. And we gave them a little room first, and then we gave them a second room and so forth. But the basic structure of the room was always handled by the committee. Now, if you were the head of it, the American Joint Distribution Committee, and you came into this building thinking it was your own, and you found that the big main room was occupied by Klausner and his desk, and the second big room is by his staff. The third floor is, he lives up there. And all that you have are two little rooms where the secretaries are working. You felt that somebody's taking over. But he wasn't aware that he was dealing with a historical factor. I think that was his problem. And then we had a situation, an embarrassing situation, where he turned against me. Grinberg and I were coming up the stairway from the basement, I remember, and he just broke out in a frenzy, in anger. And I looked at Greenberg and I said, "What's the matter with the guy?" And we walked away.
This is 1946?
But it was during his tour of duty.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it was before this July 17th?
No, it must have been after that.
Mm-hmm. Because it shows a great deal of hostility.
Oh yes, there's no question about it. After I read it, in fact, afflicted a form of hypomania. Of course, maybe he's right, but that's a matter of judgment. Levi Becker, on the other hand, as he quotes him, took the position that Klausner was here and this was the program. And Levi recognized the situation.
Yeah, I get the feeling that Levi Becker and you had a much better relationship.
Oh, we had a wonderful relationship. Yeah. I mean, we had no problems. I mean, he may have thought about certain things and wondered about certain things, but he came into the picture, he saw it, and he realized that he couldn't jump into a car and go out and scrounge a hospital, or he couldn't go out and scrounge food, or he wasn't, first of all, in that type of a position.
You see, when I speak to JDC people, I get the feeling that they were as capable of doing all of these things as anybody.
Well, there are two questions you have to ask. Is one, why weren't they there to do it?
Well, they came in later.
Well,
right?
so
Fine.
I mean, so in time-wise, they couldn't have done it then.
Right.
And secondly, if they could do it, why didn't they do it?
Well, some said they did.
Well, then who did it and what did he do?
Right,
I
right,
mean, it's, I'm willing to, in fact, I was constantly pushing them towards this kind of work. And they were constantly indicating to me that they have to stay on the narrow path because they were subject first to UNRWA. Mm-hmm. And UNRWA was a kind of a strange apparition in terms of its structure and its assignment and its work. And they, in turn, were under Army. At least, if I can understand it too. If I were finally stopped in terms of my work and sent out, good. There were institutions to carry on. The Joint couldn't afford the liberties that I took upon myself. It had a certain responsibility. It had to account. I didn't have to account to anyone. The whole question of accountability. And so therefore, a man who has to account to either to UNRWA or to Army or to its organization in New York has to take a different position. Now, if they were smart, and those that were said, fine, good. We'll run our formal structure, and here let them do what they can, and we will assist them directly or indirectly. And those that took that position came out ahead in terms of the work. And when you take people like he describes Lipa in his terms, but if he would have recognized that Lipa and others were operating in a sense of making it possible for the formal organization to behave informally and to allow for that rather than to be critical of it. Now, for example, he requested her termination of service. Well, this was a ridiculous thing to do. She happened to have been, for this kind of work, she happened to be top-notch, as indicated by carrying out that whole Bogenhausen deal. When I came back one day and I said, listen, Ann, I have a job for you. I want you to go and see this captain, and this is what we have to do. And she undertook this job and carried it out wonderfully. And then to find fault with it, of course, this is an approach which unfortunately.
Well, not only that, but his last sentence is, or the last paragraph is terrible. He goes on to the. He says that you were a sick man.
Fine, that's his approach. I mean, he may be right. I don't know.
Why? Well. Yeah. Why did this? Was really vindictive.
Well, he was trying to justify himself in terms of UNRWA. After all, he has to account to UNRWA for what's going on in terms of the Jewish community, that is the DP community, and I think he would have liked to have felt that he was running it, and here he had this thing, this Klausner, and how do you handle it in terms of your organizational structure? You got to explain him away. You're not going to come and say this is a guy that's committed to a job and he's doing a good job. He's done the following. At least.
But Levi Becker was able.
Well,
to
maybe he was a different type of human being. That's why we got along well, and we had no trouble with Levi. Levi used to come to the meetings of the Central Committee. Would sit there. He was a more compassionate individual. Levi understood that the people themselves have to begin to express themselves. And his relationship with the people was of that nature, but not Schwartz. Schwartz had no relationship with the people. And Levy also recognized that there wasn't anything he could do. So, recognizing this, he did what was best for him and the whole organization. He said, fine, I'll swing along with these people, do whatever I can do to help them, and at least have a joint presence here. And that's what he did.
But Schwartz wasn't...
no, Schwartz wasn't
happy with that.
He wanted something else.
Fine. Was there anything else on that aspect before we go to some other area, if you have the time?
No, I have the time.
Okay,
just,
fine.
I don't know just what you want to know.
Was there anything else about Bogenhausen?
No, we set up the hospital. It operated. Pesachovich took over, and whatever problems we had from time to time. Was that the telephone?
I think so, yeah.
What were we?
Bogenhausen.
No, the hospital functioned. It functioned for quite some
Bogenhausen.
time. There was no problem. It served as a hospital in Munich. It gave us another facility, and we had no further problems with it.
Okay, if we can get to Dachau.
Yes.
I see this report that you...
Yes.
Was this disseminated to any of the major Jewish organizations, or what was the basic purpose? This is from file 44, Evo, Shelit HaPleita, Germany. A detailed report on the liberation of the liberated Jew as he now suffers during this period from liberation.
You can turn it on.
Yeah.
No, I can't answer the question now as to why I prepared this report and what the objective was.
Excuse me, this is file 144.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In all probability, I prepared it for some purpose and sent it to someone, and just to whom and what. I had no office, you must bear in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that I did, I had to do on the run. And time was precious. And if I would sit down and prepare a report of this sort, it meant that I was doing it for a given purpose, that it had to be delivered to somebody.
That's what I figured.
Yes.
Now, somebody had put a question mark here. Now, I don't know who, where, or when. Do you have any...
Well, who put, I don't know.
I mean, no, but what would be the question?
I don't know unless there's another question mark on DS, which should be a DP assignment, but that statement is not a correct statement.
That, what's there is not correct?
The statement is not true.
You mean what's printed here is not correct?
That is not true. That it says authority for this report resides in DP assignment through Headquarters 7th Army with specific purpose of working with the peoples of the respective camps. I was not given that assignment.
Right, so maybe that's the reason
That
why.
may be, or else it refers to this DS here, which would be DP. Somebody just, put
But
this
why,
here.
this is supposedly your report.
Oh, well, I had to cover myself. In other words,
I understand. In other words,
I mean, I created the authority for myself. The only authority I ever had was as chaplain's instruction to go to Dachau, which they weren't clear about, and then a couple of weeks thereafter to leave Dachau. I mean, that was the beginning and end of it. And
you know that Browdy told me that the way he got he was the one who was responsible for getting a chaplain. He traded a pistol for you.
Well, that's his story.
You don't remember?
I'm not familiar with this, and I have no objection to being traded for a pistol. All I know is that the instruction came to Paris, headquarters there. It was not for me in particular.
No, he said that he needed a chaplain, and he spoke to the chaplain in charge of...
Perhaps, in other words, in being in the headquarters of 7th Army, he may have needed a chaplain. He sent instruction to Paris to send a chaplain to Dachau, and I was the one that was chosen. That part may be true. I don't know why you need a pistol for that.
Well, he said that the reason that this other chaplain was reluctant to give him a chaplain, and since he had not been at the front, he wanted a souvenir.
Oh, well.
So as a token of appreciation.
Yes, wonderful. That's all right.
So I thought you might
but
be
I had
interested in that.
I had no authority, actually. I created my own authority, and this particular report, I just couldn't recall at this moment just what my objective was in preparing it.
Okay, fine. Now, in talking to a number of people who were at Dachau, either Sidney Davidson, who was head pharmacist with the army there, and a number of other people, they mentioned that they did not know you.
Yes.
And my feeling was that there must have been so much activity going on at the time that nobody knew anybody else. Is that
No
true?
probability. Yes.
And now
If
there's
you were to ask me...
Marcus Smith, for instance, who was a doctor in Dachau.
Mhm.
He didn't remember you, or he didn't remember Burke, Dr. Burke?
Well, Burke was Berkowitz at the time, not Burke.
Oh.
Sidney Berkowitz, and secondly, he was with the 10th Field, and he was an Allah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to give you a picture of the situation, which would explain who knew whom, first of all, the medical units remained only for a short period of time. There was no attempt on my part,